I don't know that I would change anything. Quite honestly, I think I've learned from every situation that I've been in. If you ask me if I changed something now, if I had that knowledge back then, sure, absolutely, right?
Right.
I think the only thing that I would probably change is I would put myself in the company of more people that knew more than I did. And I wasn't good at that when I was young. I was kind of cocky and thought I knew everything, right? The longer I've gotten into my career, the more I've learned that you need to surround yourself with the right people.
Hello, and welcome to the Elevator Careers Podcast, sponsored by the Allred Group. I am your host, Matt Allred. In this podcast, we talk to the people whose lives and careers are dedicated to the vertical transportation industry to inform and share lessons learned, building upon the foundation of those who have gone before to inspire the next generation of elevator careers. Today, our guest is Mike Loeffler, Senior Vice President and General Manager with VDA Vertical Transportation Consulting. Mike started in the industry working in the field and loved it from the very beginning. He values that early learning as being key to his success, and he continues to learn every day, even well into his career. Mike enjoys working as a consultant and loves being able to assist both clients and contractors in finding mutually beneficial solutions to projects and/or issues and help foster relationships. His only regret is that he wishes he had found consulting sooner. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. You and I have talked several times. It's been a while since I've been able to do this, so appreciate it. It was fun to get together.
Yeah, no, I'm excited. It's a lot of fun. I always enjoy our conversations, and I'm excited to be able to talk a little bit more about your career and some of the things you've learned. And so I'm curious, what led you to the elevator industry in the first place?
It was a bit by happenstance. You know, the elevator industry is a pretty large family. A lot of family members, or it's generational in many cases. I'm not. I'm the first one of my family to get in the trade. When I was a teenager, I used to race motocross up into my 20s, and one of my best friends' father was a construction manager for Miami Elevator in South Florida, and he saw something in me, and when I graduated high school, I went to work for him the next day. That's
Wow.
kind of how
So you said race motocross. Were you like a mechanic, like building your own bikes and all that stuff?
I've always been fairly mechanical, I think. The first time I remember my father getting really mad at me was I was 3 or 4 years old, and I took his lawnmower apart. So I've always worked on stuff. So yeah, when I'm racing motocross, you're working on your own motorcycles, and I built a trailer for my stuff because I didn't have the money to go buy new ones. So it was kind of I was self-funded. My father wouldn't give me a penny. He supported me all the way through, but he wouldn't give me a penny to do it because he didn't really want me out to cycle anyhow. But and that's kind of where all he saw of me was in that setting.
Yeah. No, I mean, it sounds like
before. I shouldn't say that. Before I came to work in the elevator trade, I was building houses. So.
Okay.
In my spare time after school.
Right. So pretty handy. Sounds like, yeah, on motorcycles and lawnmowers too, and houses for that matter.
Yeah, my first love. I actually went to trade school to learn carpentry and cabinet making. So I still do that a lot in my when I have.
Cool. Yeah. How have those skills served you after getting into elevators?
I think they served me very well. I mean, as you know, an elevator mechanic has to know a lot of different trades, right? They're plumbers, they're electricians, they're carpenters, they're iron workers. The old saying was, if you had a roofer's card, it covered everything, right? But we did more than the roofers. So I thought it complemented that industry very well, from at least a little bit that I knew, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So started right out of high school. I mean, that's I'm just curious, when did you realize this is cool and I'm going to do this the rest of my life?
Probably a year and a half in. It wasn't long. When I got in the business because it was good money, right?
Sure.
Back then, I think I started in the trade. I was making $13 or $14 an hour as a 50% helper, and that was more than I was ever going to make building houses or
sure.
Washing cars or whatever. So once I got into it and started learning the business, and I think that's really what drives me. To this day, I'm in the business for 44 years now, and I'm still learning. Right, so I'm always of the opinion that if you're not learning or expanding whatever you're out to do, you're kind of dying, right? Same with business, right? Not growing, you're dying. So that's really, I think, what drove me into really pursuing it. And I'm a very competitive guy anyway. So if anybody, if there was another team next to us building an elevator and they were doing it faster, I felt we had to work harder to get it done faster. So it turned into a game, right? So, and we had great relationships with most of the people, almost all the people that I ever worked with.
Right.
And that kind of drove me. So, but it was fun, great camaraderie. It's a great industry to be in. Like I said, it is like the elevator industry is pretty small, but it's a lot of camaraderie, a lot of family type circumstances. So it was a lot of fun coming up.
Yeah,
I worked
absolutely.
in the trade for 14 years, I think. I worked in the field, I should say. Started with Miami Elevator in 1978 and worked for them into 91, I think. I still technically work for them, but I moved to North Dakota. That's when I kind of got into management. I was a construction foreman, which back then you were still paid hourly, but you were running the show. And that lasted about a year up there. And I became operations manager for North and South Dakota, Montana, and Wyoming. And spent 3 years doing that, a lot of travel, but it was, like I said, very interesting to me to be in a different part of the world and see different aspects of how you build elevators, especially in the freezing cold, right? So,
yeah, I can't imagine.
Yeah, I learned that. I lasted 3 years being a Florida kid in North Dakota, and then left there and moved to Atlanta, Georgia, and that's when I went to work for Otis. Spent 20 years, spent 20 years with Otis in various positions, and then became a consultant in 2014, into 2014.
Cool. Yeah. Who were some of the mentors that really you felt like invested in you that maybe got you through some of the hard times?
There was a couple. I mean, the first manager I mentioned that actually got me in the trade, he was a good mentor of mine. He pushed us hard, but I would say he was my first mentor. And as I got more comfortable in the trade, then the owners of Miami Elevator, Gary and Steve Bailey, were very instrumental, I think, in my advancement. They weren't necessarily hands-on, but they were always there. When you saw them, they were always there to talk about the business and give you hints about what things could do better and what their focus was. And I learned a lot from them about business and especially in Gary's case, it was a lot about business and how to have fun while you're doing it. So it was,
right. What was it that motivated you to take the opportunity in North Dakota? Because you're right, that's a long way from Florida.
Well, I'm not going to tell you it wasn't about money. It was. It was also, but it was as much to me about the challenge of trying something completely outside my comfort zone. I felt that I knew enough about elevators that I could teach other people to do that, and wanted to be the type of person that can help others grow and succeed. And that's really what my focus has been since. It's not so much looking for that next promotion. It's really just working with people and in my current position as a consultant, helping our clients, find solutions to their problem, give them the most value for their buck.
Right. You've in previous conversations, you've told me about some interesting projects. What are some of the most fascinating ones you've had the chance to work on?
Several. I would say there was not when I was working in the field in Florida. I wouldn't say it was any huge projects. There was it was more. I kind of got the oddball stuff. So there was a stage lift, as I mentioned, University of Florida stage lift at University of Florida that was for an orchestra. So it was, in hindsight, it was fairly simple, but I'd never seen it before. But we were there for probably 6 weeks, putting in a huge platform, and it had 4 hydraulic cylinders pushing that up and down, all synchronized. So that was pretty cool. Working on one of the most challenging and interesting projects. I'd say it probably was the most challenging and interesting project I ever did, was working on a modernization at the space shuttle launch pads at Cape Canaveral.
That sounds amazing.
It was initially supposed to be a fairly simple mod. We were going to replace travel cables on both cars and a cab on one, his duplex in each launch pad, and then replace the rails on one elevator. Well, that, I think it was supposed to be a 3-month project for $300 and something thousand, and by the time we left there, it was 15 months later, and with the change orders, it was almost $1.5 million.
So, oh my gosh.
And we were working 24/7 trying to get it done before the launch was scheduled. So it was demanding. I would say that was one of the most stressful times in my career, trying to get that project done. We did get it mostly done. They had to boot us out of there before we got the final adjustments done, because the launch was in 3 days, and they had we were 99.9% done.
They said it's close enough, right? We're
well, no, they got their own on-site folks that went through and did the final touches. Oh, okay. We gave them a list of what needed to be done, so we just couldn't be on site because of the top secret stuff that was going on for that launch. But they did the launch, and then we moved over to the other launch pad and did something similar, but that was much easier going because it was a little newer than the other one. But
gotcha.
Those were, after working there for a year and a half, or I guess it was 2 years between the two of them. I have no question about where our tax dollars go today. NASA has no qualms about spending money, but it was an interesting thing, and to learn about what goes on outside of the elevator industry at the Cape was a lot of fun too. So we learned a lot of stuff.
That's very cool. That's very cool. So what was it that led you to consulting when you decided to finally do that?
Several things. I think the biggest thing was I trying to put this nicely. There was a little conflicting I had conflicting issues within, and I say that because how the elevator companies that I worked, the company that I worked for at the time, was doing business versus what I thought we should do for our clients. So any large corporation, you've got shareholders that expect them to make X number of profit, but if you tell a client you're going to do something, you should follow through. And in a lot of cases, that wasn't happening anymore. So to me, I felt I'd be better off going on the other side of the table and helping our clients make sure that the elevator companies were doing it.
Yeah. Do you feel like that has resolved that conflict for you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I talk about it every day with our team. Some people are more passionate about it than others. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, so I'm probably not as it doesn't hit me as hard as somebody just coming in, right, or just leaving that same situation. I think I've learned that elevator companies and the people that work for them need to make a living. They're in a business. We don't expect them to do it for free. Sure. We just don't expect them to get rich on every job. I mean, we work very hard to maintain relationships with the elevator companies and contractors, independent and the OEMs. It's a fine line that you have to walk there, because if a client has they've signed an agreement and they feel like they shouldn't have to do something, or there's a part that we want to argue about whether it's obsolete or not. Those are the kinds of conversations now, to me, are fun, because in the end we're going to find common ground. But when I first started, it was frustrating, because you got some people that are pretty steadfast in their thought process, and I can be pretty hard-headed. So there was a lot of headbutting going on. But we've learned over the years. I've learned to see both sides of the fence, and it's pretty rewarding.
What would you say is the most big, the biggest challenge as a consultant? What's the most difficult thing about that?
Probably balancing that. I mean, you can't. It's even more difficult if you're walking into the middle of a project, and like, for instance, if a client has hired a contractor, they have an agreement, and that contractor, in the client's mind, may or may not be performing, right? But in the client's mind, they're not. So we go in, do an evaluation, and look at the agreement that they have, and sometimes you have to tell the client, well, that's what you bought, right? And even though that's not what they wanted, but they didn't know enough at the front end to to know any better. So they were sold a bill of goods that may or may not have been completely advantageous for their project. So if it's much easier if we're in on the front end, because then everybody knows the expectation. We're very clear on what's specified and what's going into that. If there's a problem throughout that project, it's usually because somebody doesn't understand what was agreed to, and that's typically pretty easy to work through.
Yeah. How often does that happen that a client will call you kind of halfway through a disaster and say, "Hey, come clean this up for me," or whatever they say?
Not as often as it used to. And I say it from a project, whether you're talking about construction or a large modernization where somebody's already contracted the company to do that, and then they go, crap, they're not doing the right thing. It's more commonly now where we're getting into situations where you have larger building has a water inlet, for instance, and their elevators, they have to get their elevators up and running quickly, and that typically happens pretty quickly. May not get them all running, but at least they're getting people moving through the building again. And then they get this massive proposal for components that may or may not have gotten wet, right? So those are the more challenging ones. Or you have a client that has contracted a long-term maintenance agreement with a company and they're not performing. That's very situational, where you may have a certain type of equipment that really is best suited for that company that's maintaining it, but you have to work a new agreement with them. That's challenging times, but it's I'm going through one right now in a high rise down in Miami where they had a 10-year agreement in place and they're 4 years into it, and we're trying to negotiate a new one.
Right.
and to the company, the contractor's defense, what's in it for me? Right? Why should I all of a sudden tack on all this new scope to my agreement and have to deal with that? No, I don't expect you to do it for free, but let's work out. So those are the more challenging negotiations. But if we get in on the front end of a project, usually we set the expectation that's communicated very well, and those typically go much smoother than something where we're coming in.
Sure. Yeah, and I'm sure there's some companies, some contractors that know right at the get-go, hey, we really want a partner to walk us through this because we may not know what this looks like. And
I think the companies
some don't.
The companies that have been in business for a time, right? I'll say, been in the business for 10, 15, 20 years, understand that the consulting side of the business is needed, and as long as they have a decent relationship and we're treating them fairly, it goes very smoothly. I can tell you on the service side of the business, especially if you talk to the folks in the field, they actually prefer a maintenance agreement that is very descriptive. How often you need to be in the building, how much time you need to spend on preventative maintenance. They like that because they know they're actually going to be able to do something for the client, rather than the standard, what we'll call an oil and grease contract, where they have to be there periodically. It may not be monthly, maybe quarterly, or maybe at their discretion. But regardless, any other thing that they're doing there is being charged to the client, right? So in those cases, the client thinks they're saving money on their monthly or quarterly maintenance, but in the long run, they're spending a lot more because they get charged for it. So those are the kinds of things we try to educate our clients. And in almost every case, if we prescribe a full maintenance contract that covers, most everything under that elevator, they're paying less on an annual total cost.
Interesting.
And something that's maybe half the price monthly, but they're getting charged on unbudgeted items that they're not. It's not covered under that agreement.
It's interesting, and I guess I, not being working in the industry, I wouldn't have known that, but I can see the appeal to take the cheaper, what do they call it, lube oil, grease, whatever. Lube oil filter is what I wanted to say, but I know that's the wrong term. But what do you call it when it's just kind of the bare bones?
It's commonly known in the industry as an oil and grease company. Right? All they're doing is coming in and looking at it. They may or may not lubricate anything, but they're making sure things are working okay. If there's a problem, if it's as simple, they may tighten a bolt or grease a bearing or something. But for the most part, anything outside of that, they're, for instance, if you've got a door operator arm that's getting ready to fall off or needs a new chain, or the door detector is not working properly, they're going to walk off the job, send a proposal, and then when I call the client side, they'll come back and fix it. So it's not,
Right.
it's not, if that's the way the agreement's written, I'm not going to argue that, but it's not to the benefit of the client when he has something that's ready to break or has broken, and they got to wait for the proposal process to get signed before they do it. So it could be days, weeks,
Sure.
some cases months, depending on the severity of the repair.
Right. How often do you get clients that don't want to do what you recommend?
More often than I like, but it's.
Come on.
I would say if I had to guess a percentage, there's always some negotiation there, right? I walked into condo board meetings, and they have the residents there, and we've gone through the bid process, and we make our recommendation, and we present that to the board and their residents, and there's always somebody there that has engineering background or construction background. And, well, why the hell are we doing that? Can't we do this? Or my elevator in my other building in New York, it's 100 years old, and we haven't done anything to that, which may or may not be true, but regardless, that's their opinion. And so we explain why we're making that recommendation and why we think it's the best value to do X, Y, and Z. And it's after that, it's up to them to. It's their contract when we're not involved. So it's their money. They're signing the contract. We'll explain to them why we don't think it's a good idea, but ultimately it's their decision. But I would say, how often does that happen? 10% maybe. It's.
Do they ever come crawling back saying, "Oh man, I wish"?
Well, they don't, and this happens commonly in residential, where we'll work through that with a board, and 8 months later the board changes, and then we have problems, and they'll come to me and say, "Well, VDA told us to do this." So, well, actually, we did, but that's not what you did, right? So that gets a little challenging sometimes when you're in we've had I've been working on a project now. I was just talking to one of our consultants, 6 years old. We've been through 4 boards and 6 project managers.
Ouch.
In 6 years. So one hand doesn't know what the other one's doing. So we're constantly trying to make them understand where we are in the project and what was included and what wasn't included, and here's why, et cetera, et cetera. So those are the challenging parts. That's other condos will hire us, and you guys are the experts. You just tell us what we need to do, kind of thing, which is nice,
right?
That they trust us to do that. But there's usually somewhere in the middle of that, one end or the other, right, of that happening.
Right. Yeah. So if you had your career to do over again, you said 44 years, right? So if you had to do it over again, what would you do different?
You and I talked a little bit about that in our last conversation, and I thought about that hard. I don't know that I would change anything. Quite honestly, I think I've learned from every situation that I've been in. If you ask me if I changed something now, if I had that knowledge back then, sure, absolutely, right? I think the only thing that I would probably change is I would put myself in the company of more people that knew more than I did. And I wasn't good at that when I was young. I was kind of cocky and thought I knew everything, right? The longer I've gotten into my career, the more I've learned that you need to surround yourself with the right people. I didn't do that when I was young. So that's one. That's probably the only thing that I would.
In that same thing is surround yourself with those people, but you got to be willing to absorb all that they're willing to teach you, because if you aren't open to the suggestions and the coaching, the mentoring, the teaching they have, then it's not going to go anywhere.
I'm going to use a line of Nick Saban's, because I've used this in a couple meetings of ours. High achievers don't like mediocre people, and vice versa, right? So if you put yourself, if you're inserted into a team where those two are on the same team, they're not going to have the same ideology. They're not going to push as hard. You're going to have that. The other part of that same speech from Nick Saban was you need to get the right people on the bus and the wrong people off the bus, right? Sure. And put them in the right seats. And I was just looking at something on the internet this afternoon on LinkedIn, and that speech with Nick Saban talking popped up again. It was quite funny. So I'm reminded of that quite a common, but it is a great message, and it has to be, and that's the fun part of what I do today, because I'm more on the management side of this, is getting the right people in on the team that where it's needed. I mean, we have offices that have a pretty high volume of people. Our New York office has 40 plus people in it. Our Miami office has, I think we have 7 people in that office, and then I have offices around the country where it's just one person, right?
Right.
And those are the more challenging positions because they have to sell it, they have to perform it, and they have to bill it, and they have to collect it. Well, I shouldn't say that. I mean, we got admin support remote for them regardless. They're not doing everything themselves, but regardless, if the phone rings, it's their duty to handle that start to finish. Where in other offices, we can specialize a little, right? We can have people that are doing the field work and somebody that's great at specifying the job and working through that with the client. And so it's not a one size fits all.
No, not at all. And so from your perspective, that is a huge piece of what you do is getting the right players, like you say, on the right bus or on the right seat on the bus and making sure that the whole ship can sail.
Right. It's that's probably the most rewarding thing that I do today is trying to make everybody that works for us successful. Ultimately, that's the bottom line.
Yeah, that's a lot of.
They're successful, we're successful. I in my previous life, the other thing I struggled with was I worked with a lot of people. The higher up in any corporation you get, that were more concerned about the next promotion than they were about doing the right thing for the company or the client. And that drove me absolutely crazy. It was more positioning than performing. And that's, in my opinion, that is absolutely the wrong. You may get to a certain point in that corporation, but you're not going to get to where you want to be. And I think having the integrity to know that I'm not as good as that guy, I need to learn more before I can take that position.
Right.
Is much more rewarding than trying to push your way into it when you're not ready.
Yeah.
It took me a better part of 20 years into my career before I figured out I just need to know, I need to be better than the guy that's in the position I want, if I really want it, right? First, I want to learn about that, right? And then I need to work harder and learn more and know more and be more productive than he does, and eventually it'll come. It's not worried. Don't worry about that next promotion. Worry about learning and being the best you can be, and that will come.
Absolutely. Well, even if it's not that particular job, right? There may be some other company that needs your skills, but you've got to develop the skills before you can expect to be, using skills you haven't got.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't take a job with VDA to be the senior vice president, general manager. I enjoy consulting, and I do very little of that anymore. But
right.
I do like working with the team and helping them advance and learn their craft, and so that's rewarding. But I do miss working directly with the clients. It's not as still do to a point, but not as much as I used
to. Sure. Yeah. Yep. What would you say is the single biggest lesson that you've learned throughout your career?
Relationships are more important than you think, both internally and externally. My father used to, or I should say, my parents would always instill in me, treat others like you want to be treated. And that never clicked until I was probably 30. I'll be honest, because when I worked in the field, I was a screamer and a ranter and a raver, and I was, yelling at people all day long. You need to work faster and harder, and what the hell are you waiting for? And that worked for a little while, and eventually everybody around me, including myself, got worn out because you're so intense all the time, right? So it goes back to the old work smarter, not harder thing. But relationships with your clients, you need to maintain them. If they trust you, they're not going to talk to anybody else. They're going to call you, especially if you help them fix their problem.
Sure.
It's rewarding when the phone rings and they're calling you, only you, to help them with their problem. And granted, you have to deliver. And so a lot of times you're dropping what you think you should be doing to go help them in that moment. But it's a little bit of a juggling act. But if you maintain those relationships and your clients and the people that work around you trust you, your life is a lot easier than if you're fighting the whole way through.
Yeah. I mean, some people seemingly, and I don't hear people saying it as much, but it just seems like there's a lot of, and maybe it's more outside the elevator industry, but a lot of emphasis on, it's all about price. It's not so much about relationships. How does that, I mean, in this industry, what do you think?
This is coming from a baby boomer, so I have to be careful, right? Uh, but I see it in people that have been in the business for 30 or 40 years, where they have a job for 15, 20 years, and then you look at their resume and they make a move every 2 or 3 years. And there's reasons for that in many cases, I think, but it's more of they're unsettled and not really understanding what they want out of their career. That's at least that's what I found. I tell you that from a personal perspective. One of my positions was when I was with Otis Elevator. I was in charge of field operations, but they called it field support. But I also worked with the engineering group to develop new products to help them make it installation friendly. And that's really where I learned to juggle a lot of balls in the air. And I say that because I had to maintain a relationship with the engineering department, so they trusted me that I wasn't just trying to shove stuff down their throat. And on the other hand, my job was to support the field, give them all the documentation and training and all that stuff. My group, it wasn't just me, but I did very little of it. Also, those guys were to develop training, get the training to them, and make them as productive as they can in the field. and the object for the engineering team was make that product as cost effective as possible. But the fun part for me was making them understand, okay, it may cost $10 less to modify that part, but it may cost you $100 in the field to install it because you took one part and made 4 out of it. Right? We got to put all that back together. So, so that was I would say in my whole entire career working in the field, building new things and learning how to make things better. And then on that side of it, other than what I'm doing now as a consultant, were the 2 most rewarding positions I did. I truly did enjoy working in the field. I just kind of got bored with it. In my mind, I had installed everything that was ever made, right? In the escalators and high rise, low rise.
Sure.
And mastered it. At least in my mind, I had mastered it. My boss would probably tell you something different. That was the fun part of that. And then once I got into consulting, it's helping people solve problems. Ultimately, it's all the same. Helping people work solutions to the issues they have and make them successful. So in the bottom line, that's what I enjoy the most.
Right. So as we wrap up today, a final question I got for you is, what advice would you give to someone who's just starting out a brand new career in the elevator industry?
Be patient. Learn as much as you can from the business, from the people around you. May not all be good. At least you learn what not to do, right?
Sure.
And build relationships both internally and externally. I think, and then lastly, don't get complacent. You may get to a level where you think you're comfortable now, and I can relax a little bit and do what I'm doing. There's 4 people behind you wanting your position, right? So always strive to be the best. Take in as much as you can, and continue to learn. I mean, it's. Because I run the operation for VDA, I got an email today where somebody said, "Hey, I got this board. Do you know where I can get it repaired or get a replacement for it?" He sent me a couple of pictures, and I'd never seen it before. 44 years. What kind of equipment? And it's in a controller that I'm very familiar with. It was actually an Otis controller. But it's you're learning something every day. So I just keep an open mind, and there's always things you can do better. Doesn't mean you have to work harder. Just keep that open mind and maintain those relationships both with your clients and internally, because it's going to benefit you in the long run.
Awesome. Mike, thank you so much for being with me today. I appreciate your time and your wisdom.
Pleasure. It was good finally getting together with you and get this done.
Yeah. Thanks again, and wish you the best.
You too, Matt. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Elevator Careers podcast, sponsored by the Allred Group, a leader in elevator industry recruiting. You can check us out online at elevatorcareers.net. Please subscribe, and until next time, stay safe.